My boyfriend's family pretended to be poor to test me, so I pretended to be broke and watched them beg. My boyfriend's family once pulled a stunt on me. They pretended to be broke just to see how I'd react. So I decided to play along. I acted like I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together and watch them squirm. I'd been dating Ethan for about 8 months when he finally asked me to come over for Sunday dinner and meet his family. On the drive there, he was unusually tense, fidgeting with the steering wheel, which was kind of adorable considering how confident he usually was. "Just so you know, my family's pretty low-key," he said, his fingers tightening around the wheel. "We don't have much, but we share what we've got." I squeezed his hand and told him I didn't care about any of that, which was the truth. What I didn't mention was that I'd already done a little digging. LinkedIn really is a goldmine. His dad, Thomas, owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the state. His mom, Margaret, sat on the boards of 2 major corporations. And his sister, Rachel, was a partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. The address he'd given me? It was in Maplewood Hills, the kind of neighborhood where the average house costs about $2. $3 million. So when we pulled into a quiet street and stopped in front of a small ranch house with peeling paint and an overgrown yard, in a completely different part of town, I knew right away what was going on. They were testing me. Ethan parked beside an old sedan that looked like it had seen better decades, not just better days. The garage door was closed, which I figured was hiding whatever expensive cars they actually drove. "This is it," he said, trying to sound casual, though his voice had that nervous edge. I smiled, told him the place looked cozy, and followed him up to the front door. His mom opened it wearing a faded sweatshirt and old jeans, her hair tied back in a plain ponytail. "You must be Brooke," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt a little too deliberate. "Come on in. Sorry about the mess." Inside, the house looked like it had been staged for a sitcom about a struggling middle-class family. Mismatched furniture that was probably rented, cheap art on the walls, and a TV that looked like it belonged in a museum. But the details gave them away. Hermes scarf draped over a chair, a Mont Blanc pen sitting out like an afterthought, and on Thomas's wrist, a faint tan line from where his expensive watch usually rested. I complimented the house anyway, and Margaret smiled politely. "We've lived here 20 years, she said. "It's got good bones, even if it needs some work." Dinner was served on chipped plates with bent forks, and I noticed Rachel trying hard not to grimace while using the cutlery. Caleb, Ethan's younger brother, kept sneaking glances at me like he was waiting for me to bolt. Thomas asked what I did for work, and I told him I was between jobs, which wasn't technically a lie. I just sold my marketing firm for 8 figures and decided to take some time off. "Tough economy," he said sympathetically. "What field were you in?" I kept things vague. "Digital marketing. A little freelance work here and there." Margaret jumped in. "Did you go to college?" "Yeah," I said. "A couple years. Had to drop out for financial reasons." Total lie, but I wanted to see how far they'd take the act. That answer seemed to seal something for them. They exchanged quick looks like they'd just confirmed a theory. Caleb leaned forward. "You still paying off student loans?" "Sure am," I said easily. Margaret placed a gentle hand on Ethan's arm. "That must be stressful," she said with that faux sympathetic tone people use when they think they're better than you. Throughout dinner, they kept dropping these little breadcrumbs about their supposed financial hardships. Thomas complained about how expensive car repairs were, which was funny, considering I'd seen his LinkedIn post last month bragging about expanding his dealership empire. Margaret mentioned clipping coupons and hunting sales, while Rachel moaned about lingering law school debt, which was hilarious since she'd graduated 15 years ago and made more in a year than most people make in 10. Their performance was actually pretty well rehearsed. I'll give them that. After dinner, Ethan excused himself to help his mom in the kitchen, and Thomas suggested we step out back for some air. I followed him onto a deck that looked like it hadn't seen a coat of stain in years. He leaned against the railing, face serious. "Ethan really cares about you," he started, and I could practically hear the setup coming. "We just want to make sure you care about him for the right reasons." I played dumb. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "Ethan's a good kid with a big heart. We've seen him get hurt by people who were more interested in what he could offer than who he was." "So, you're asking about my intentions?" I said. He nodded slowly. We're not a wealthy family, Brooke. What you see is what you get. If you're with Ethan expecting an upgrade or financial support, well, that's not something we can give. I met his eyes and said calmly, I'm with Ethan because I love him, not for what's in his bank account. Thomas seemed satisfied with that and gave my shoulder a quick pat before heading back inside. I stayed out there for a moment, took out my phone, and texted my assistant. Pull my investment portfolio details. I need documents that make me look broke. Create a paper trail for student loans, credit card debt, everything. Make it believable. She texted back almost instantly. On it. When I went back in, Margaret caught me before I could sit down. She held both my hands gently, like she was about to deliver bad news. You seem like such a sweet girl, she began carefully. But I need to be honest with you. Ethan has big dreams. He wants to start a business, buy a house, have a family. All of that takes money and stability. She gave me this look that mixed pity with concern. I just want to make sure you two are on the same page about what your future might look like. I nodded and told her I completely understood. I said I was working to get back on my feet financially, but it might take time. Have you thought about what happens if things get serious? She asked softly. How you'd contribute to a household? I smiled and said, We'll figure it out. Ethan and I are a team. Whatever comes, we'll handle it together. Margaret nodded, but her eyes told me she wasn't buying a word of it. When Ethan and I left that night, he immediately started apologizing for how his family had acted. They just worry, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Money's always been tight for us, so they get protective. They don't want me ending up in a bad situation. I kissed his cheek and told him I understood. Then I suggested we crash at my place for the night. He agreed, and when we got to my modest one-bedroom apartment, tucked in a perfectly average middle-class neighborhood, I could see him finally relax. What he didn't know was that the little apartment was just part of my cover. I also owned a penthouse downtown and a beach house in Malibu, but this space made it easier to keep up appearances. Over the next couple of weeks, his family really leaned into their humble lifestyle act, and I could tell they were also quietly digging into my background. Caleb sent me a friend request on social media and spent days scrolling my page, screenshotting my carefully curated posts, thrift store finds, budget recipes, coffee shop selfies. Then Rachel invited me to lunch. She spent the whole time talking about how expensive everything was, sighing dramatically about how she wished she could afford nicer things. The whole charade was getting exhausting, but I played my part. I showed up to family dinners in Target clothes and drove my old backup car, a beat-up sedan that could have been a prop from their act. I complained about my landlord raising rent and mentioned taking on extra freelance work just to stay afloat. Every time I caught them sharing those smug little looks, clearly convinced their test was working. Then came Ethan's birthday. His family threw a small gathering at the same fake ranch house, and I arrived with a gift I'd put a lot of thought into. A first-edition book he'd once told me he dreamed of owning. I'd won it at auction for $12,000, but I had it rebound in a cheap, worn cover and told him I'd found it at a used bookstore for $20. Ethan's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. He hugged me tight, thrilled by what he thought was a simple, thoughtful gift. His family, on the other hand, looked unimpressed, disappointed, even like they'd expected me to try and buy his affection with something flashy. That's when Margaret gave me the look and said, Brooke, honey, can we talk? She led me into the kitchen, where Rachel and Thomas were already waiting. The three of them had the same serious, almost rehearsed expressions, and I knew this was the moment they'd been building up to. Thomas started. We've all grown very fond of you these past few weeks, he said warmly. Margaret nodded. We can see how happy you make Ethan. Then Rachel jumped straight to the point. But we're concerned about the financial dynamic in your relationship. I tilted my head, pretending not to understand. What do you mean? Rachel folded her hands. We've noticed you're struggling financially, which is completely understandable. But we're worried about how that might affect Ethan's future. Thomas added, He's worked hard to get where he is. We just don't want to see him held back because he has to support someone who can't contribute equally. The words hung heavy in the air, but I stayed quiet, letting the silence do some of the work. Margaret spoke next, using her best kind but firm mom voice. We're not saying you're a bad person, Brooke. You clearly have a good heart. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to think practically. I asked them plainly, "Are you asking me to break up with Ethan?" The three of them exchanged looks before Rachel said carefully, "We're asking you to think about what's best for him. Is it fair to let him build a future with someone who might become a financial burden?" I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my tone steady. "I understand your concerns," I said, "but Ethan and I are adults. We can make our own decisions about our relationship." Thomas sighed and shook his head slightly. "We hoped you'd be reasonable about this. We're prepared to make it worth your while to walk away." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, setting it on the counter between us. "There's $5,000 in there," he said. "Take it. Tell Ethan you got a job out of state and let him move on." I stared at the envelope, then at the three of them. Margaret actually had tears in her eyes, like she hated doing it. Rachel looked all business, cold, professional. And Thomas just looked resolute. I picked up the envelope, opened it, and counted the cash right there on the counter while they watched. Then I started laughing. At first it was just a small chuckle, but it grew until I was laughing so hard the three of them looked visibly uncomfortable. "Is something funny?" Rachel asked sharply. Still grinning, I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and turned the screen toward them. The balance read $847,000. Just my personal checking account. "You're trying to pay me $5,000 to leave your son?" I said, still laughing. "I spent more than that on his birthday present." Their faces changed all at once. Confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror. "That $20 book?" I continued. "It's a first edition, authenticated, purchased at Sotheby's." The color drained from Margaret's face. Thomas snatched my phone for a closer look. Rachel's jaw literally dropped. I took my phone back, opened my real LinkedIn profile, the one I'd hidden from Ethan and his family, and turned it toward them. Brooke Whitmore, founder and former CEO of Catalyst Digital Marketing. Sold the company last year for $8.3 million. Now serving on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. Net worth? Somewhere north of $15 million, depending on the market. I watched the realization hit them like a wave, disbelief giving way to embarrassment. Then I swiped to the folder I'd been keeping on my phone, screenshots and photos from the past few weeks. Thomas's dealership expansions, Margaret's corporate board listings, Rachel's law firm website, even pictures of their real house in Maplewood Hills with the Tesla parked in the driveway. "Did you really think I didn't know who you were?" I asked, my voice cold now. "I did my research the day after Ethan and I met." Thomas blinked. "How did you know about the rental house?" "Property records are public, Thomas," I said flatly. "This house is owned by Select Property Management. Been rented month to month for about 6 weeks, right around when Ethan probably told you he was getting serious with someone." I turned to Margaret. "A nice touch with the Hermes scarf, by the way. You almost sold the struggling mom look, but not quite. Couldn't resist sneaking in a few designer pieces." "Huh?" Rachel finally found her voice, professional tone back in place. "If you knew we were testing you, why play along?" I smiled, and it wasn't the friendly kind. "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. I wanted to know if you'd really try to buy me off to leave your son." "And you did," I said evenly. "So now I know exactly who you are." I took a quick photo of the envelope and the cash sitting on the counter. "That's evidence, by the way," I added. "Offering someone money to end a relationship? Depending on the lawyer, that could fall under coercion. Lucky for you, I don't need your money, and I'm not interested in dragging this into court." I smiled faintly. "I'm more interested in watching you explain this to Ethan." And right on cue, Ethan walked into the kitchen. His eyes darted from the cash on the counter to his family's pale faces, then to me. "What's going on?" he asked carefully. I turned toward him and said, calm but clear, "Your family just offered me $5,000 to break up with you. They think I'm a gold digger who's only here for the money." Ethan's face went ghost white. "What?" he said, looking at his mother. "Mom." Margaret opened her mouth, probably to start damage control, but I cut her off. "They've been testing me, Ethan. This house, this whole struggling family act. All of it. They wanted to see if I'd stick around even if you were poor. His eyes flicked around the room, confusion giving way to disbelief. And when I passed that little test, I continued, they decided I was actually too poor for you and tried to pay me off to leave. I held up my phone, showing him the screen. For the record, I make more in interest every month than what they just offered me. Ethan stared at the numbers on the screen, then looked back at his family. You're rich? He asked, voice unsteady. I shrugged. I sold my company last year. I've been taking some time off to figure out what's next. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to know me, not my bank account. I gestured toward his family. Apparently, we had the same idea, except your version came with a payoff envelope. Thomas tried to recover. Ethan, we were just trying to protect you from. Ethan cut him off, holding up his hand. You pretended to be poor? You rented a house, filled it with secondhand furniture, and put on this whole show just to test my girlfriend? Caleb appeared in the doorway, eyes wide, clearly trying to make sense of what he'd just walked into. Ethan's voice rose, cracking with anger. And then when she passed your test, when she proved she'd stay even if we had nothing, you tried to buy her off because she didn't have enough money for you? Rachel stepped forward, her tone clipped. We were thinking about your future. You deserve someone who can be an equal partner financially. Ethan gave a short, bitter laugh. An equal partner? You mean like how Mom was an equal partner when you married Dad fresh out of law school, making nothing while he was building his business? Should he have paid you to leave back then? Rachel's face flushed crimson. Ethan turned to his mother next. And you, Mom, didn't you tell me Grandma tried to break you and Dad up because he was just a car salesman from a working-class family? That you eloped because she couldn't see past his paycheck to who he really was? This time, Margaret's tears weren't manipulative. They were raw tears of shame. Ethan took my hand firmly. We're leaving, he said. Don't call me. We walked toward the door, and Thomas's voice cracked behind us. Son, please, we made a mistake. We were just trying to look out for you. Ethan turned back, his expression hard. You want to look out for me? Then trust me to make my own choices. Brookie could have blown up your little experiment the first night. She could have humiliated you, but she didn't. She played along to see what kind of people you really are. And now we both know. We stepped out into the night and walked down the street to where my real car was parked. A black Mercedes G-Wagon. Ethan stopped short, staring at it. This is yours, he asked quietly. I nodded. One of them. This one's my favorite. He didn't say anything for a minute, just got in and sat there, stunned. We drove in silence for a while until he finally said, I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were going to do any of that. I reached over and took his hand. I know you didn't. If I'd thought you were in on it, I would have walked away that first night. He squeezed my hand, still processing. Why didn't you tell me? He asked softly. About your money? I pulled into a parking lot so we could actually talk. For the same reason your family pretended not to have any, I said. I wanted to know you loved me for who I am, not for what I could buy. I've dated enough men who were more interested in my portfolio than my personality. Ethan nodded slowly. I get that, he said. But you could have told me once you knew I wasn't like that. I smiled a little. I was planning to. I was actually going to tell you this weekend. Show you my real place, my life, everything. But your family kind of forced my hand. He looked down at the steering wheel, shaking his head. My family's really rich, like really rich, and they pretended to be poor just to test you. That's insane. I laughed softly. It's definitely creative. Most families just grill you over dinner or stalk your social media. Yours went full method acting. Ethan smiled weakly. Where are we going now? I'm taking you to my penthouse downtown, I said. He blinked. You have a penthouse? Penthouse, beach house, and the apartment you've been staying at, I said with a smirk. That one's real. Just not my only place. The elevator ride up was quiet. When the doors opened, Ethan froze. The penthouse took up the entire top floor. Wide open, glass everywhere. The city lights stretching out for miles. This is really your place? He asked, walking toward the windows. I kicked off my shoes. Yeah. Bought it 3 years ago as an investment. Ended up falling in love with it. The light here is unbelievable. He turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Is this weird for you? Watching me process all this? I shook my head. I knew I'd have to tell you eventually, I said. I just hoped it'd be on my own terms, not because your family forced the issue. We sat down on the couch, and I handed him my phone. Here, this is my real life. He scrolled through photos, board meetings, the company sale announcement, magazine features. Then he Googled my name and laughed softly. You're kind of famous. In business circles, yeah, I said. That's why I keep things low-key when I'm not working. It's easier to live like a normal person when no one knows how much you're worth. I told Ethan that after selling my company, I just wanted a break. A chance to step away from being Brookie Whitmore, the CEO, and just be Brookie, a woman trying to figure out what comes next. Ethan set my phone down and looked at me, his expression soft. I love you, he said quietly. Both versions, the broke freelancer and the secret millionaire. I just wish my family hadn't ruined the way you found out. I smiled and kissed him. They didn't ruin anything, I said. If anything, they did me a favor. I got to see exactly how much you value money, which apparently isn't at all. You stood up for me against your whole family without knowing I had a single dollar to my name. Ethan pulled me closer, resting his forehead against mine. They're going to call, he warned. Probably a lot. They'll apologize, explain, make excuses. I told him he could handle it however he wanted. I'm not going to tell you how to deal with your family, I said. But if they really want to make things right, they should probably start with a little self-reflection. Maybe ask themselves why they thought testing me like that was okay in the first place. He nodded, agreeing quietly. We spent the rest of that night just talking. Really talking about everything we hadn't yet shared. Over the next few days, his phone was a constant buzz of calls and messages. He ignored most of them, but every so often he'd read one out loud. Margaret's message was the longest. A rambling apology about how fear had turned her into someone she didn't recognize. She admitted she'd been terrified of seeing Ethan get hurt again and had gone too far trying to protect him. Thomas's text was shorter, more measured. He admitted they'd crossed a line and asked for a chance to make it right. Rachel's message surprised both of us. It was genuine, almost self-aware. She wrote that seeing Ethan defend me reminded her of how Thomas used to defend Margaret when his own mother disapproved of their marriage. She said she realized they'd become the very people they once despised. Caleb's text made Ethan laugh out loud. Your girlfriend's badass. Sorry we suck. A week after the dinner fiasco, Ethan finally agreed to meet with his parents. I offered to go with him, but he shook his head. I need to do this on my own, he said. He was gone for 3 hours. When he came back to the penthouse, he looked drained, but lighter somehow, like he'd finally set something down he'd been carrying too long. They're going to therapy, he said, dropping onto the couch beside me. All of them. Family therapy. They're trying to work through their control issues and paranoia. I asked how he felt about that, and he sighed. It's a start, he said. They admitted their wealth made them paranoid. They were so afraid of someone using me for money that they came up with that ridiculous test. And when you passed, when you stayed even though you thought they were broke, it didn't fit their worldview. They couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that someone would love me just for me. I sat down next to him and let him lean against me. He was quiet for a moment before adding, Mom said something that stuck with me. She said when you've had money long enough, you start to wonder if anyone would still love you if you had nothing. So they created that fake situation to find out. He gave a short laugh. And when you actually stayed, it broke their brains. I smiled faintly. Their logic was flawed from the start, I said. If I were a gold digger, I'd have researched your family, figured out you were rich, and pretended to be the kind of woman who didn't care about money. Their little test only works on amateurs. Ethan laughed for the first time since that night. To be fair, he said, grinning, you kind of did research them and play along. Fair point, I admitted, smiling back. But I did it to see their real character, not to scam them. There's a difference. About 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Margaret. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. She asked if I'd be willing to meet her for coffee. Just the two of us. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to see if she was truly sorry or just running another play. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Margaret arrived looking nervous, her whole demeanor softer. The shabby, struggling mom look was gone, replaced with her true style. Elegant, expensive, but understated. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I was curious," I said honestly. "I want to hear what you have to say." She took a deep breath. "I'm not going to make excuses for what we did. It was manipulative and cruel. We hurt you and Ethan, and I'm sorry." She went on to explain that over the years, they'd had more than a few people try to cozy up to the family for money. "It made us paranoid," she admitted. "We stopped seeing people as individuals and started seeing everyone as a potential threat." I didn't interrupt. I just let her talk. She said therapy was already helping them unpack those habits, but it would take time to undo the mindset they'd built over decades. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said finally. "I'm just asking for a chance to start over, to actually get to know you for who you are, not as someone we're testing or judging." I studied her for a moment, then asked, "If I really had been broke, struggling in debt, barely getting by, would you still be here apologizing? Or would you still think you were right to push me away?" Margaret went quiet for a long time, and I respected that she didn't try to fill the silence with fake sincerity. Finally, she said softly, "I'd like to say yes, but honestly, I don't know. Therapy's making me realize how warped my values became. I measure people's worth by their financial status, half the time without even noticing I'm doing it." Her eyes welled up. "My mother-in-law did that to me once. She looked at me and saw nothing but my bank account, and decided I wasn't enough. I swore I'd never become like her, but somehow I did. I just had more money to hide behind." I nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty," I said, "and I'm willing to start over. But I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. This is who I am, money included." Margaret nodded. "I understand," she said quietly. We talked for over an hour, and by the end, I felt like I was finally seeing the real woman behind the act. She told me about her early years with Thomas, how they'd lived in a small apartment and ate ramen most nights, how she wore the same 3 outfits to work because they couldn't afford more. "But I was happy then," she said softly, smiling at the memory, "because we were building something together." Margaret told me that when the money finally came, it didn't just change their lifestyle, it changed their entire world in ways they hadn't been ready for. "Suddenly, everyone wanted something from us," she said. "Relatives we hadn't heard from in years started calling with sob stories about loans. Old friends expected us to pick up every check. And new people, well, they always seemed to have some once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity." I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that comes from years of being guarded. I told her I understood how that could make someone paranoid, but testing people wasn't the answer. Therapy, boundaries, and trusting your own gut about who people are, that's how you deal with it, I said gently. Margaret nodded. "That's what we're working on," she said. "It's just going to take time." And over the next few months, things really did start to shift with Ethan's family. They invited us to dinner at their actual home in Maplewood Hills, the one they'd hidden behind the fake rental house. It was almost comical walking into that place after everything that had happened. The contrast was staggering. The rooms were huge, the furniture looked like something out of a design magazine, and the artwork probably cost more than most people's mortgages. Rachel pulled me aside during dessert and gave me a private apology. "I think I was the worst of the bunch," she said honestly. "I pushed for the test. I pushed for the payoff. I told myself it was about protecting Ethan, but really, I was projecting." She admitted that she'd married her ex-husband partly for financial stability, and when that marriage imploded, she started seeing everyone through that same cynical lens. "I convinced myself anyone who cared about money was shallow," she said. "But I was the shallow one. I turned relationships into transactions." Caleb, still in college and trying to figure out who he was, admitted something similar. "I was starting to look at dating the same way," he said. "Always suspicious, always assuming people wanted something from me. But after what happened with you, I realized that's no way to live." Later that evening, Thomas pulled me aside. "Ethan told us about your company," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "What you built, what you accomplished, that's impressive as hell. Building something from nothing and selling it for that kind of value, that takes brains and grit." I wish we'd taken the time to know you before judging you. We would have been proud of Ethan, not paranoid. I thanked him for saying that and told him the truth. I'm not going to hold the test against you forever, I said. But I won't forget it either. It showed me who you really are under pressure, and that's valuable information. Thomas nodded, accepting that without defensiveness. Fair enough, he said. We'll work on showing you a different side of us. Over time, they did. Family dinners stopped feeling like minefields. I started being included in their group chats and family plans. Margaret even invited me to her book club, which, to my surprise, was full of wealthy women who actually talked about books instead of who was getting Botox or buying new cars. About 6 months after the whole birthday fiasco, Ethan and I were having dinner at the penthouse when he suddenly got serious. I've been thinking about the future, he said. Our future. I set my fork down, giving him my full attention. He told me that after everything that had happened, after seeing me handle his family with so much patience and grace, he realized how much he trusted me. You could have destroyed them, he said quietly. You had evidence. You had every reason to go nuclear, but you didn't. You gave them space to learn. I told him I hadn't done it for them. I did it for him. They're your family, I said. I didn't want to be the reason you lost them. Ethan reached across the table and took my hand. I know this might sound crazy, he said, his voice shaking a little. We're young, and it hasn't even been that long, but I need you to know something. I want to spend my life with you. My heart skipped. He smiled nervously. I'm not proposing, he said quickly. Not yet. I just need you to know. That's where my head is. That's where my heart is. I squeezed his hand. Good, I said softly, because I feel the same way. Funny enough, your family's little test might have been a blessing in disguise. I got to see who you are. A man who stands by me without hesitation, even when everything's stacked against me. That told me everything I needed to know. That night, we talked for hours about our future, the kind of life we wanted, what we wanted to build separately and together. He was working on launching his own business, and I was back consulting for startups, trying to figure out my next big project. We both wanted something meaningful, something real. A year and a half later, Ethan proposed. He did it at my beach house in Malibu, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. No elaborate setup, no audience, no over-the-top gestures. Just him, me, the ocean, and a ring he'd designed himself. When we told his family, they were genuinely happy. Margaret cried. But this time, the tears were real and good. Thomas hugged me and said, "Welcome to the family, officially." Rachel joked, "Guess you're stuck with us now." And Caleb immediately asked if he could bring a date to the wedding. Planning the wedding was surprisingly drama-free. Margaret offered to help but made sure to say she'd understand completely if I wanted to handle things my own way. Truth be told, I appreciated her input. We actually bonded over cake tastings and flower arrangements. One afternoon, while touring venues, Margaret said something I'll never forget. "I'm grateful you gave us a second chance," she said quietly. "A lot of people wouldn't have." I smiled. "Everyone deserves the opportunity to grow," I told her. "You were coming from a place of fear, trying to protect Ethan, even if the way you showed it was wrong. I can understand that, even if I don't agree with it." Margaret squeezed my hand. "You're going to be a good addition to this family," she said softly. The wedding itself was beautiful, everything we wanted. We held it at a vineyard that struck the perfect balance between elegant and intimate. Both our families were there, and watching mine, comfortable, middle-class, grounded, mingle with the Worthingtons was surprisingly heartwarming. At the reception, Thomas gave a speech that brought half the guests to tears. He talked about almost losing his son because he tried too hard to protect him, and how I taught their family what grace and forgiveness really look like. "Brookie could have held our mistakes over our heads forever," he said, turning toward me. "But instead, she chose to see us as flawed people who were trying to do better. And that's the mark of real character." Then Ethan took the microphone, smiling at me with that soft look that still made my heart skip. His speech was short, but it hit harder than any I'd ever heard. He said the best thing that ever happened to him was meeting someone who saw past his last name and bank account to the person underneath. And the craziest part is, she had a bigger bank account the whole time and never said a word. Everyone laughed, and he continued, Brooke taught me that real love isn't about what you have or what you can provide. It's about who you are and how you show up for each other. Now, 2 years into marriage, Ethan and I have found our rhythm. His business is thriving, my latest venture is taking off, and we split our time between the penthouse and the beach house. Ethan's family has become genuinely wonderful to be around. They're still wealthy and sometimes a little out of touch, but they're working on it. They go to therapy regularly, and I've watched them become more aware of their privilege and more generous with their time and resources. Margaret volunteers at a women's shelter now, helping women who are rebuilding their lives. Thomas started a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. Rachel does pro bono legal work for families dealing with predatory lending. Caleb is studying social work, wanting to help people in need. Sometimes I think about that first dinner at the rental house, how angry and hurt I felt watching them test me. But I also think about how that test revealed something important. It revealed who Ethan was under pressure. It revealed who his family could become when challenged. And it revealed who I was when given the choice between revenge and grace. The money didn't matter in the end. What mattered was finding someone who valued me for me, and building a life based on mutual respect and genuine love. Everything else was just noise. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.